Greetings moviegoers and welcome to another Midnight Movie Madness. I'm the host, and the summer movie season has officially begun with the release of one of the year's most anticipated sequels, The Amazing Spider-Man 2. In case you missed my 2012 review of The Amazing Spider-Man 1, I found that film to be a very enjoyable series reboot with a stellar new cast and a unique spin on an origin story that even non-comic book fans could recite backwards. It wasn't a perfect movie per se, but it was definitely a really good reintroduction of the Spider-Man mythos that many of us expected would play out even better in the sequel. But before I make my final judgments, let's take a look at the story. In the new film, Andrew Garfield reprises his role as Peter Parker, who at this point is having a complete blast helping the city as everyone's friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. However, his life outside of being a masked web-slinging superhero is a lot more complicated as, on one hand, he has to decide whether or not he should continue his relationship with Gwen Stacy, played once again by Emma Stone, and on the other hand, he's on the verge of solving a mystery left behind by his mother and father. While that's going on, we see the introduction of an insecure and disturbingly obsessed Oscorp employee named Max, played by Jamie Foxx, who one day falls into a vat filled with electric radioactive eels that collectively turn him into a brand new opponent for Spider-Man, Electro. There's also a subplot involving Harry Osborn, played by Chronicle's Dane DeHaan, desperately seeking a cure for his genetic disease, and Paul Giamatti makes a brief appearance as the Rhino. More on that later, but right now, let's talk about what's good about the film. The returning cast is just as great as before, most notably Garfield and Stone, but I also would like to give a shout out to Sally Field as Aunt May, who has one big scene with Peter that's almost guaranteed to generate a few lumps in the audience's throats. I also like the new suit, the colorful visuals, and the awesome soundtrack by Hans Zimmer that undoubtedly lives up to the amazing part in the title. Too bad the rest of the film couldn't. What am I talking about, you might ask? Well, to put it rather frankly, the storyline is kind of a mess. Say, you remember way back when it was first announced that this sequel would include 3 villains? Practically everyone had an automatic suspicion that this movie would suffer from the same problem Spider-Man 3 had, and to a certain extent, it does. Each of the 3 actors did a good job playing the film's antagonists, but they're either given a very limited amount of screen time or very little to work with. For starters, the Rhino holds no purpose other than to show up, look goofy, and bookend the picture. Harry Osborn could have been the central villain since he holds a personal connection with Peter Parker, but instead, the filmmakers chose to give most of the screen time to Electro, who despite looking really cool, feels just about as crowbarred into the film as the Rhino. And what's so strange about this is that this movie is nearly 2.5 hours long, and yet they couldn't even find a way to develop any of these new characters and story arcs, especially with the friendship between Harry and Peter. I mean, what is the point of having them be childhood friends if they never even established this in the previous movie? Say what you will about the Raimi films, but at least they had a structure and an emotional weight that moved the story forward. Here, it just looks like an obvious desperation on Sony's part to rush out whatever comic book storyline they could get their greedy hands on and lazily stitch it together just so they can retain the rights from Marvel Studios. And while I don't find it to be in any way, shape, or form a bad movie, I can't quite call it a good one either. I just found the story to be completely unfocused and lacking in substance. By the time it all ended, I was left feeling very empty and wished for something better. So as much as it sucks for me to say this, I'm gonna have to give The Amazing Spider-Man 2 a 5 out of 10. Now, I can only assume that most of you out there will either agree or disagree with my criticism of this movie, and if that's the case, leave a comment below and tell us why you think this film is worth or not worth defending. With that said, that concludes our show. I'm the host, and I will see you next time on another Midnight Movie Madness.